The question landed in the briefing room like a live grenade. "So tell me, Lieutenant, what's your kill count?" Rear Admiral Victor Kellerman stood at the head of the conference table, arms crossed over a chest decorated with 30 years of ribbons. His smile was the kind that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that said he already knew the answer and was enjoying this. 15 senior officers watched. Some shifted in their chairs. Others stared at their coffee cups. None of them met the eyes of the youngest person in the room. Lieutenant Junior Grade Sierra Ashford sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. 20 years old, female. Her navy dress uniform was immaculate, but her ribbon rack was nearly empty. No combat action ribbon, no deployment markers, just her rank insignia and a single ribbon most people wouldn't recognize unless they knew exactly what to look for. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her hands stayed flat on the table, fingers spread slightly, palms pressed down against the polished wood. 4 seconds of silence stretched into eternity. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood, seated 3 chairs down, noticed the breathing pattern. 4 counts in, hold. 4 counts out, hold. That wasn't nervousness, that was tactical breathing. The kind you learned in advanced stress inoculation training, the kind that took years to master. He'd seen it before, in Afghanistan, in operators who had done things they couldn't talk about and survived things they couldn't forget. 62 years old, silver hair cropped military short, Blackwood had spent 40 years in the Marine Corps. He'd seen every kind of officer the military produced. The brave ones, the cowards, the politicians, the warriors. He'd learned to read people the way some men read maps, and this young lieutenant was setting off every alarm bell in his experienced mind. "Come on, Lieutenant." Kellerman's voice carried the easy confidence of a man who had never been seriously challenged. "It's a simple question. Every real operator has a number. Or are we talking single digits here?" He let his gaze travel deliberately down to her chest, where a proper combat veteran's ribbons should have been. Maybe 0. Scattered laughter rippled through the room, nervous laughter, the kind that fills uncomfortable space because nobody knows what else to do. Master Chief Evelyn Murdoch sat near the window, 45 years old, sealed trident on her chest, 17 years of operations in places that didn't exist on official maps. She was watching the young lieutenant with an intensity that made the captain next to her uncomfortable. Something about this girl wasn't right. The stillness was too controlled, too deliberate. That wasn't the posture of someone who had never seen combat. That was the posture of someone who had seen too much. Murdoch had spent 2 decades studying body language, reading stress responses, identifying the difference between genuine calm and the kind of manufactured composure that came from severe trauma. She'd seen operators who could sit through mortar attacks without flinching. She'd seen men who could joke while bleeding out from shrapnel wounds. She'd never seen anything quite like what she was seeing now. The lieutenant's hands were perfectly still, but if you looked closely, and Murdoch was looking very closely, you could see the tendons standing out slightly on the backs of those hands. The subtle tension of someone pressing down against an immovable surface. Grounding technique. The kind you learned in advanced psychological training for handling extreme stress. Where the hell did a 20-year-old liaison officer learn grounding technique? "Lieutenant Ashford," Kellerman stepped closer to the table. "I'm waiting for an answer. How many confirmed enemy combatants have you personally eliminated in service to your country?" Sierra lifted her gaze. Her eyes were dark, calm, completely unreadable. When she spoke, her voice carried no heat, no defensiveness, no embarrassment. "I don't count the people I killed, sir." The chuckles died instantly. Kellerman's expression shifted, still confident, but now there was a sharper edge to it, like a predator that had just caught an unexpected scent. "Oh?" He uncrossed his arms, leaned forward slightly. "Too many to remember?" That's what the real operators say when they've actually done the work. His smirk widened. "But you're what, 20 years old? Fresh out of the academy?" When exactly did you have time to rack up a count too high to remember? More laughter, but it was thinner now. Something in the room had changed, and even the officers who were enjoying the show could feel it. Sierra's hands didn't move. Her posture didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Something that made Colonel Blackwood's hand move instinctively toward the table edge, as if preparing for sudden action. Because most of them didn't die by my trigger, sir. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Admiral James Price, presiding over the briefing from the center seat, leaned forward. 58 years old, 3 stars on his collar, 32 years of service. He'd been running operational briefings for 15 years. He knew when something had shifted from routine to critical. Several officers exchanged glances. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Navy psychiatrist seated near the back, went very still, his pen hovering over his tablet. Kellerman barked out a laugh, but it sounded forced now. Didn't die by your trigger. That's creative. So what, you called in an airstrike? Artillery? Somebody else did the shooting for you? Sierra didn't answer immediately. She looked past him at the digital map on the wall. Red zones marking conflict areas. Blue lines tracing supply routes. Green zones indicating Allied positions. Her eyes traced a route that wasn't currently displayed, following geography only she could see. Colonel Blackwood caught the movement. He'd seen operators do that before. Mental mapping, tactical replay, the kind of internal navigation that happened when you were reliving something you couldn't forget. His heart rate increased. That wasn't a desk officer look. That was a field operative look. He thought about his son, Lieutenant Jacob Blackwood, 23 years old when he died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Operation Nightfall, the classified mission that had taken 41 American lives and left Blackwood with questions that no one would answer and grief that would never heal. I chose the timing, Sierra said. Her voice was quiet, almost clinical. The route, who got extracted, a pause, barely a heartbeat, and who didn't. Captain Ryan Hartley, seated directly across from Sierra, set his coffee cup down with deliberate control. 44 years old, 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. He knew that phrasing. He'd heard it before in after-action reports that never saw daylight. The ones where the mission succeeded, but the cost column had names instead of numbers. Lieutenant, his voice was careful, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. Are you saying you served in a tactical coordination role? Sierra's eyes were still fixed on some distant point only she could see. I'm saying that in certain operations, the person pulling the trigger isn't the one making the decision about who dies. Her voice was steady, clinical. The call sign, the coordinates, the timing window, the extraction sequence, those decisions happen upstream. She stopped. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. And when you're upstream, you carry different numbers. The silence that followed was so complete that Murdoch could hear the ventilation system cycling, could hear someone's watch ticking 3 seats away, could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Something was very wrong here, or very right. She couldn't tell which. Kellerman recovered first, but his confidence was forced now, strained. Lieutenant, if you're claiming you made tactical decisions that resulted in enemy casualties, I'd like to see the documentation, because my file is classified, sir. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Kellerman's jaw tightened. 58 years old, Rear Admiral for 18 months, he'd spent his entire career climbing the ladder. He knew how to read people, how to identify threats, how to neutralize them before they became problems. This lieutenant was becoming a problem. Classified files don't mean classified experience, Lieutenant. They usually mean administrative convenience. Someone wanted to hide a lack of qualifications behind a security clearance. Admiral Kellerman. Admiral Price's voice carried a warning edge. That's enough. With respect, sir, it's not enough. Kellerman turned to face Price directly. We're planning operations that will put thousands of American lives at risk. I want to know that everyone in this room has earned their seat." He gestured dismissively toward Sierra. "Lieutenant Ashford has no visible combat experience, no deployment markers, and a sealed file that tells us nothing. For all we know, she spent her career coordinating coffee schedules at some embassy, and someone stamped her file classified to hide the embarrassment." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. The insult was too direct, too personal, even by Kellerman's standards. But Sierra didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't show any emotion at all. That was what made Dr. Marcus Webb lean forward in his seat. 45 years old, 23 years studying stress responses in military personnel. He'd seen every variation of anger, fear, shame, and defensive posturing that the human nervous system could produce. He'd never seen this. The lieutenant wasn't suppressing a reaction. She wasn't hiding her emotions behind a mask. She was simply absent, like she'd retreated to somewhere deep inside herself where the Admiral's words couldn't reach her. He'd seen that response before. In patients with severe trauma histories, in operators who had experienced things that fundamentally changed how their minds process stress, in people who had learned that the only way to survive was to disconnect from the present moment and retreat into a fortress inside their own minds. He started typing notes on his tablet. Concerning dissociative presentation, recommend immediate follow-up. Possible PTSD, possible operational trauma, age inconsistent with typical career trauma accumulation. Lieutenant Ashford, Admiral Price's voice was gentler now. Careful. You mentioned tactical coordination. Can you be more specific about what operations you're referring to? Sierra's eyes finally focused, came back to the present moment. She looked at Price, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement. Price knew something, had cleared something, had authorized this briefing knowing what might happen. Operation Nightfall. 2 words, barely above a whisper, but the effect was immediate and devastating. Colonel Blackwood went pale, actually pale. The color drained from his face in a way that was visible, even in the harsh fluorescent lighting. His hand gripped the edge of the table hard enough to turn his knuckles white. "That operation is sealed." His voice had a tremor in it that wasn't there before. "How do you know that name?" Kellerman looked between Blackwood and Sierra, trying to understand what he was missing. The puzzle pieces weren't fitting together. "What's Operation Nightfall?" Nobody answered. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Master Chief Murdoch stood up slowly. Her movement drew every eye in the room. "Admiral Price." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded almost like fear. "I need to ask Lieutenant Ashford a direct question." Price nodded. His face was grim. He knew where this was going. Had known since Sierra had requested permission to attend this briefing. Had known and had authorized it anyway, because some truths needed to come out, no matter how much damage they caused. Murdoch turned to face Sierra directly. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. 3 years ago, Murdoch said quietly, there was a tactical coordinator attached to a joint task force operation in Kandahar province. Call sign Phoenix 7. Youngest operator ever assigned to that role. She paused. 17 years old. Sierra's breathing pattern stuttered. Just for a second. Just long enough for Murdoch to catch it. The casualty report listed Phoenix 7 as killed in action. Body never recovered. Murdoch's voice was barely above a whisper now. But I always wondered. The timeline never made sense to me. The body was never found. The file was sealed so fast. And there were rumors. The kind of rumors that get people court-martialed if they repeat them. Rumors about Project Olympus. About teenagers recruited for tactical coordination roles. About operations that went wrong and got buried. She leaned forward slightly. Master Chief. Sierra's voice cut across the room, quiet but sharp. What's your question? Murdoch took a deep breath. This was the moment. The question that would either confirm the impossible or prove that 20 years of operational experience had finally made her paranoid. Are you Phoenix 7? The room held its breath. Sierra Ashford looked at the woman who had asked the question, looked at the seal trident on her chest, looked at the years of service and sacrifice written in the lines of her face. Then she looked around the table at 15 senior officers who had spent the last 10 minutes watching her be humiliated by a man who had never bothered to learn who she really was. She thought about the wall in her apartment. 27 faces, 27 names, 27 photographs she looked at every morning and every night. 27 reasons she woke up from nightmares screaming and spent hours staring at the ceiling because sleep meant reliving the worst night of her life over and over again. She thought about 3 years of carrying weight that should have killed her, 3 years of being dead, 3 years of being a ghost that the military had created and then tried to forget. No more. Yes, the single word detonated like a bomb. Several officers actually gasped. Colonel Blackwood made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a gasp, not quite a groan, something in between. A sound of recognition and disbelief, and something else that might have been grief. Kellerman's face went from confused to shocked to something that looked almost like fear. That's impossible. His voice was strained. Phoenix 7 was killed in action. The report said 41 casualties. Sierra's voice was steady now, eerily steady. 40 in the field. One tactical coordinator who was supposed to be in the kill zone. She paused, and when she continued, her voice dropped to barely audible. But I was 200 meters outside the perimeter when the strike hit, so I survived. Another pause. I got to live with it. I got to carry them. Admiral Price's fingers were flying over his tablet, pulling up files, cross-referencing. His face was grim. Lieutenant Ashford, I'm looking at the Operation Nightfall operational file right now. Classification level is... He stopped. His expression changed. This requires special access programs, multiple clearances. How are you able to discuss this in an open briefing? Because I was Phoenix 7, sir. Sierra's voice was flat, mechanical. I have permanent access to all operational files related to that call sign. She met his eyes directly. I am the file. Master Chief Murdoch sat down heavily in her chair. Her face was gray. Phoenix 7 coordinated a hostage rescue operation in Kandahar province. 12 American civilians held by Taliban forces. The extraction was supposed to be clean, in and out. She looked at Sierra with new eyes, with terrible understanding. But something went wrong. The intelligence was compromised, Sierra said. Her voice was distant now, like she was reading from a report rather than speaking from memory. The extraction team walked into an ambush. 27 Rangers on the ground. 8 hostages rescued in the first wave. 4 hostages and 27 Rangers trapped behind enemy lines. She stopped. Her breathing was visible now, the controlled rhythm breaking down into something more ragged. Command made a decision. Maintain radio silence to protect a larger operation. 200 Tier 1 operators were moving into position for a different objective. If we broke radio silence to coordinate extraction, we would compromise their position. The room was absolutely silent. Every officer in that room had made hard decisions, had chosen between bad options and worse options, had lived with the consequences of calls that saved some lives and cost others. But none of them had made those decisions at 17 years old. The casualty projection was 300 minimum. Sierra's voice cracked for the first time. So the order was given: maintain silence, accept tactical losses, protect the larger mission. Admiral Price leaned forward. Lieutenant, who gave that order? Sierra finally looked at Kellerman, really looked at him, and something in her eyes made the Rear Admiral take an involuntary step backward. You did, sir. Her voice was quiet, deadly quiet. 3 years ago, when you were Major Victor Kellerman, commander of Operation Nightfall, you gave the order to maintain radio silence regardless of extraction requests. She paused, her voice caught. You said tactical losses were acceptable within projected parameters. The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. Every eye swung to Kellerman like synchronized machinery. 15 pairs of eyes, 15 expressions ranging from shock to horror to barely contained rage. Kellerman's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. I heard them calling for extraction. Sierra's voice was stronger now, but something had broken in it. Something that couldn't be put back together. 27 voices on the radio calling for help, calling for rescue, calling for someone, anyone, to answer. She stood up. Her legs were unsteady, but she stood. I heard Staff Sergeant Rachel Brennan calling for her team. I heard her voice change from professional to desperate to... Sierra's hands were shaking now. I heard Private First Class Tyler Garrett telling his squad to hold position. Help was coming. Just hold on a little longer. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't seem to notice. I heard Corporal James Mitchell praying. I heard Sergeant David Palmer singing. I heard Lieutenant Jacob Blackwood. She looked at Colonel Blackwood. I heard your son, Colonel. I heard him telling his Marines to stay calm, to trust command, to trust that Phoenix 7 wouldn't leave them behind. Blackwood's face was wet. Both hands pressed flat on the table like he needed the support to stay upright. I heard all 27 of them for 6 hours while I followed your order. Sierra's voice broke completely while I maintained radio silence, while they waited for rescue that was never coming. Colonel Blackwood had both hands pressed flat on the table like he needed the support to stay upright. His face was wet. I was at Nightfall. His voice was raw. Different unit, different objective. But I heard those calls. I heard he couldn't finish. I thought Phoenix 7 died with them. The report said 41 casualties. I've been carrying guilt for 3 years, thinking the tactical coordinator was killed because I should have been, Sierra interrupted. Her voice was hollow. The kill zone calculation was off by 200 meters. I survived by accident, by a margin of error in a targeting computer. She turned to face Kellerman directly. And you forgot. The word hung in the air like an accusation. You gave an order that killed 27 people. You wrote an after-action report that called them acceptable casualties. You got promoted to Rear Admiral. Built your career on Nightfall's strategic success. Her voice was rising now. And you forgot. You forgot their names, forgot their faces, forgot that someone had to execute your order, forgot that someone had to live with it. Kellerman's face was gray. His hands were trembling. I never meant. You asked me about my kill count. Sierra's voice cut across his stammering like a blade. Like it was a joke, like it was a game, like numbers are just numbers and not people with families and futures. Her voice broke completely. She pressed both hands over her face. Her shoulders shook. The room watched in silence as the youngest officer at the table fell apart in front of them. As 3 years of suppressed grief and guilt and horror finally broke through the walls she'd built around it. Master Chief Murdoch moved first. She was around the table and at Sierra's side before anyone else could react. Lieutenant, Sierra, look at me. Sierra lowered her hands. Her face was blotchy, wet, devastated. You were 17 years old. Murdoch's voice was gentle but fierce. You were following orders from your commanding officer. You made the decision that saved 200 lives. She gripped Sierra's shoulders. That's not murder. That's not failure. That's 27 people who trusted me. Sierra's voice was raw. 27 people who called for help and got silence. 27 people who died waiting for rescue while I... She couldn't continue. Admiral Price stood slowly. The movement drew every eye. Admiral Kellerman, His voice was cold, colder than anyone in the room had ever heard it. You are suspended from this briefing, effective immediately. You will report to my office at 1400 hours. We will discuss your fitness for continued command. Kellerman's face went from gray to white. Admiral Price, Get out. 2 words. No room for argument. Kellerman looked around the room, searching for support, for understanding, for anyone who might take his side. He found nothing but condemnation. He turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a verdict. The room sat in silence for a long moment. Then Colonel Blackwood spoke. "Lieutenant Ashford," his voice was rough, broken, "I need to ask you something." Sierra looked at him. Her face was still wet, but something had shifted in her expression. Something that looked almost like relief. "For 3 years, I've been trying to find out what happened to those 27 Rangers. Why rescue never came. Why nobody answered their calls." He paused, struggling to control his voice. "You just answered questions I've been asking for 3 years. Questions nobody would address because the file was sealed." He stood up, walked around the table until he was standing in front of her. "Thank you." His voice cracked. "Thank you for remembering them. Thank you for carrying them. Thank you for making sure they weren't just numbers in a report." He extended his hand. Sierra looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it. "Their names are on my wall," she said quietly. 27 photographs. 27 names. I remember all of them. Every day, every night. Blackwood's hand tightened around hers. "That's not weakness, Lieutenant. That's devotion. That's what command actually looks like when you strip away the ribbons in the rank." And in that moment, something changed in the briefing room at Fort Bragg. Something that would ripple outward in ways none of them could yet imagine. Something that would expose secrets buried for 3 years and bring ghosts back from the dead. Because Sierra Ashford, Phoenix 7, the girl who had been used and broken and buried, had finally found her voice. And she was just getting started. The encrypted message arrived at 0300 on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the briefing room confrontation that had ended Victor Kellerman's career. Sierra sat alone in her small apartment off base, unable to sleep as usual. The walls were covered with them. 27 faces, 27 names, 27 reasons she couldn't close her eyes without seeing things she wanted to forget. Staff Sergeant Rachel Brennan, red hair, green eyes, 28 years old. The first voice she'd heard calling for extraction. Private First Class Tyler Garrett, 21, fresh-faced kid from Iowa who'd enlisted to pay for college. Corporal James Mitchell, 32, 2 kids at home, wife pregnant with their third. Lieutenant Jacob Blackwood, 23, Colonel Blackwood's only son. The voice that had stayed calm even when everyone else was panicking. 27 faces. Some she'd known personally, some she'd only heard through radio transmissions. All of them dead because she'd followed orders. Her laptop chimed. A sound it shouldn't make. A notification from a channel she thought had been dead for 3 years. Her hands moved to the keyboard before her conscious mind caught up. The message was in Morse code. Old school. The kind of communication that couldn't be intercepted by modern signals intelligence because nobody was looking for it anymore. Her fingers trembled as she translated. Raven 4, still breathing, Helmand. 5 words that stopped her heart. Raven 4, Staff Sergeant Rachel Brennan, 28 years old, red hair, green eyes, a laugh that could light up a FOB dining facility. The first voice Sierra had heard calling for extraction on that terrible night 3 years ago. The voice that had stayed with her longer than any of the others. Dead. Listed as killed in action, body never recovered. Except, still breathing. Sierra's vision blurred, her chest constricted. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was seeing. This had to be fake. Had to be Kellerman trying to manipulate her. Had to be some kind of psychological operation designed to break her further. Except, The code was right. The dead drop protocol was right. The phrasing was right. Everything about this message screamed authentic in ways that couldn't be easily faked. Then training took over. The same training that had made her a tactical coordinator at 17. The same discipline that had kept her functional through 3 years of survivor's guilt. She pulled up satellite imaging software, black market access she'd maintained through contacts she wasn't supposed to have. Started scanning Helmand Province, grid by grid. It took 4 hours, but she found it. A compound in the mountains, isolated, heavily fortified, and in one thermal image from 11 days ago, a heat signature that matched female body dimensions. Moving through a courtyard under guard. Sierra's hands shook so badly she could barely work the mouse. She enhanced the image, ran it through facial recognition software that was definitely not approved for personal use. The resolution was terrible, the angle was wrong, but the build was right, the posture was right, the way the figure held herself. Master Chief Murdoch? She'd been sympathetic in the briefing room, but sympathy didn't mean she'd risk her career on what might be a wild goose chase. The answer came to her before she finished the thought. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood, the man whose son had died at Operation Nightfall, the man who had spent 3 years demanding answers that nobody would give him, the man who had thanked her for remembering when everyone else wanted to forget. She dialed his number. It rang twice before he answered. Lieutenant Ashford, it's 0430. This had better be important. His voice was alert despite the early hour. Old soldiers never really learned to sleep deeply. She's alive. Silence on the other end, long enough that Sierra thought the connection had dropped. Say that again. Rachel Brennan, Raven 4. She's alive, Colonel. I have proof. Another pause. I'll be at your location in 20 minutes. Don't talk to anyone else. The line went dead. Sierra sat in the darkness, staring at the thermal image on her screen. At the figure that might be Rachel. That had to be Rachel. That was the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense 3 years ago. If Rachel was alive, if she'd been held prisoner for 3 years, if she'd survived while Sierra had been carrying her as dead weight in her guilt, then what else had Sierra been wrong about? 19 minutes later, someone knocked on her door. 3 sharp raps, military precision. Colonel Blackwood stood in the hallway, dressed in civilian clothes, but with the bearing that never quite left career officers even out of uniform. His silver hair was uncombed. His face was lined with exhaustion that looked older than 3 days. He'd aged in the 72 hours since the briefing. Aged in a way that suggested he hadn't slept any better than Sierra had. Show me, he said without preamble. Sierra led him to her laptop, pulled up the message, the satellite imagery, the thermal scans, the facial recognition results with their frustratingly low confidence scores. Blackwood studied everything in silence. His face gave nothing away. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. The message. How did you receive it? Dark web, dead drop protocol, the kind of system we used for Operation Nightfall in case primary communications were compromised. Someone who knew those protocols sent this. Yes, sir. Someone who has been alive for 3 years and only now made contact. Sierra's throat tightened. Yes, sir. Blackwood pulled out his phone, made a call. Whoever answered did so immediately. Murdoch, I need you at Lieutenant Ashford's location, now, and I need you to bring everything you have on classified detention facilities in Helmand Province. He paused. Yes, I know what time it is. This is more important. He ended the call, turned to Sierra. 3 years ago, my son was on that operation. Lieutenant Jacob Blackwood, 23 years old. He'd been in country for 7 months. He wrote me a letter every week, told me about the mission, about the team, about a young tactical coordinator who was brilliant but seemed too young for the responsibility. Sierra couldn't meet his eyes. He said you were good at the job, said you cared about the people on the ground, said you'd go far if the pressure didn't break you first. Blackwood's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something raw. The last letter I got from him arrived 3 days after I was notified of his death. He wrote about trust, about how in combat you have to trust the people making decisions upstream. Trust that they see the bigger picture. Trust that they won't sacrifice you unless there's no other choice. He finally looked at Sierra. For 3 years, I blamed Phoenix 7, blamed whoever made the call to leave them behind. I wrote letters, made calls, demanded investigations. The whole time, I never knew Phoenix 7 was a 17-year-old girl following orders from a commander who was too much of a coward to take responsibility for his own decisions. Colonel, I don't want your apology, Lieutenant. I want you to help me understand something. He gestured at the screen. If Rachel Brennan is alive, if she's been held for 3 years, why surface now? Why send a message through a dead drop that only someone with operational knowledge would know to check? Sierra had been asking herself the same question. Because something changed. Either her situation became more desperate or she learned something, Blackwood finished. Something important enough to risk exposure after 3 years of silence. A knock at the door. Master Chief Murdoch entered without waiting for an invitation. She was in PT gear, hair pulled back, face set in the kind of expression that suggested she'd been expecting this call eventually. She looked at the screen, studied the images with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 2 decades evaluating intelligence. That's a black site, she said quietly. Former CIA detention facility, supposedly shut down in 2019 after the congressional oversight reforms. But I heard rumors. What kind of rumors? Blackwood asked. The kind that suggests some facilities were never really shut down, just transferred to different authorities, different budgets, different classifications. Sierra felt ice in her stomach. You're saying this is an American facility? I'm saying it was. Whether it still is, whether it's been taken over, whether it's being run by people with official sanction or people who went rogue. Murdoch shook her head. That's above my clearance level, which means it's probably above everyone's clearance level except a very small number of people who don't answer questions. Kellerman, Sierra said. The name tasted like poison. Blackwood's jaw tightened. What about him? He had us maintain radio silence for 6 hours, long enough for 27 Rangers to die. The official explanation was protecting a larger operation, 200 Tier 1 operators moving into position. She pulled up a different file, one she'd been building for 3 years in the hours when she couldn't sleep. But I've spent 3 years going over every piece of data from that night, every satellite pass, every signals intercept, every after-action report I could access. The screen filled with data, movement patterns, communication logs, thermal imagery. There was no larger operation. The 200 operators Kellerman claimed to be protecting, they didn't exist. Or if they did, they were nowhere near Kandahar that night. Murdoch leaned forward, studying the data. Her expression grew darker. You're saying Kellerman manufactured the justification for radio silence. I'm saying the numbers don't add up. The story doesn't fit the evidence. And 3 years later, one of the people who supposedly died that night is alive and sending distress signals from a black site facility that supposedly doesn't exist. Blackwood was already pulling up files on his tablet. His fingers moved with surprising speed for a man his age. I've had 3 years to dig into Kellerman's background too. After I learned the truth about Jacob's death, I couldn't let it go. Couldn't accept that it was just a tragic tactical decision. He turned his tablet toward them. Victor Kellerman, 58 years old, 34 years of service, spotless record, 3 combat deployments. But here's what's interesting. The screen showed financial records, bank transfers, shell corporations. 6 months before Operation Nightfall, Kellerman opened an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Over the following 2 years, $8.2 million moved through that account. The source? Multiple transfers from a mining company with ties to Afghan warlord Hamid Zarak. Sierra's blood went cold. Zarak controlled Helmand Province. He was the one who supposedly ambushed your rangers, Blackwood finished. Yes, and according to these records, Kellerman was receiving payments from a company Zorak controlled. The room was silent for a long moment. He sold them, Sierra whispered. Kellerman sold 27 rangers to a warlord. Not just sold them, Murdoch said, her voice deadly quiet. Use them. If Brennan is alive, if she's been held for 3 years, someone wanted her alive. Someone needed her alive. For what? Sierra asked. Leverage, information, proof that Operation Nightfall wasn't what the official reports claimed. Murdoch's eyes were hard. If Kellerman sold intelligence to Zorak, if he profited from those deaths, he'd need to make sure no witnesses survived to tell the story. But if some did survive, he'd need to keep them somewhere they could never surface. A black site facility that officially doesn't exist, Blackwood said, staffed by contractors with no official oversight, funded through classified budgets that don't require congressional approval. Sierra felt sick. And if the facility is compromised, if the people running it aren't who they're supposed to be, then Rachel Brennan has been held by people who answered to Victor Kellerman for 3 years, Murdoch said. Being interrogated, being used as leverage, being kept alive just in case Kellerman ever needed proof that his secret was secure. The laptop chimed again. Another message. Sierra's hands shook as she opened it. 12, still here. Zorak coming. Kellerman sold us. Hurry. 12. Not just Rachel. 12 people. 12 Americans who had been listed as killed in action, but were actually prisoners. 12 witnesses to Kellerman's betrayal. We have to get them out, Sierra said. Her voice was steady now. Cold. The same voice she'd used 3 years ago when she'd coordinated extraction routes and timing windows and decisions about who lived and who died. This is bigger than a rescue mission, Blackwood warned. If Kellerman is involved, if he has support from people in the intelligence community, going after these prisoners will expose everything. Your career will be over. Mine will be over. And Kellerman will use every resource he has to stop us. Good, Sierra said. Let him try. She stood up, walked to the wall covered with 27 faces, 27 names, 27 people she'd carried for 3 years. For 3 years, I believed I killed these people by following orders. For 3 years, I've been living with guilt that was crushing me. For 3 years, I've been the scapegoat for Victor Kellerman's crimes. She turned to face Blackwood and Murdoch. If Rachel Brennan is alive, if 12 people survived and have been suffering for 3 years because Kellerman needed to cover his tracks, then I'm going to get them out, with or without official authorization, with or without support, with or without anyone's permission. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. I left them behind once because I followed orders. I'm not leaving them behind again. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. My son trusted you, trusted that you'd make the right call even when it was impossible. He was right. He stood up. I'm in. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. Murdoch was already pulling up tactical maps on her tablet. We'll need a team, small, experienced, people who won't ask too many questions and won't hesitate when things go sideways. How long to prep? Sierra asked. 72 hours if we're lucky, 48 if we're not. We're not lucky, Sierra said. We have 48 hours before Kellerman realizes what we know, before he moves the prisoners or eliminates them entirely. She looked at the message on her screen again, at Rachel's desperate plea for help. We move in 48 hours. We get them all out. And then we make sure Victor Kellerman answers for every single name on that casualty list. Blackwood extended his hand. Sierra took it. Murdoch placed her hand on top of both of theirs. For the 27, Blackwood said. For the 12, Murdoch added. For all of them, Sierra finished. Every single one. They broke apart, started planning, started preparing, started the countdown to an operation that would either bring 12 Americans home or get them all killed trying. Outside, dawn was breaking over Fort Bragg, the sun rising on another day, another chance, another mission. The planning consumed the next 48 hours. Sierra barely slept, barely ate. Every waking moment was spent studying satellite imagery, planning infiltration routes, identifying extraction points, calculating timing windows. It was like being 17 again, like being Phoenix 7. Except this time she wasn't following anyone's orders. This time the decisions were hers alone. Murdoch brought in 3 more operators, all retired, all people she'd served with, all people who asked no questions when she explained the mission. Marcus Carson, former Delta, 42 years old, 20 years of black operations across 3 continents, the kind of operator who could speak 4 languages and kill you with a ballpoint pen. James Reaper Dalton, former SEAL, 38, 15 years of doing things governments couldn't acknowledge, specialized in high-risk extractions from hostile territory. Thomas Doc Rivers, former Marine Recon, 45, combat medic who had saved more lives under fire than most doctors saved in entire careers. The kind of operators who had done things in places that didn't exist and come back different. The kind who understood that sometimes justice required going outside official channels. Blackwood handled logistics, equipment, transportation, the kind of resources that couldn't be requisitioned through normal channels, the kind that required calling in favors from people who owed him, people who remembered what it meant to serve with honor. "We have a C-130 fueled and ready at Hunter Army Airfield," he reported 36 hours in. "Civilian contractor, no official flight plan. They'll get us to within 200 clicks of the target." "Ground transportation?" Sierra asked. "2 vehicles, armed, waiting at a cache point our pilot knows. Again, civilian contractors. They don't ask questions as long as the money's good." "And if we're compromised? If this goes wrong?" Blackwood's expression was grim. "Then we were never there. The C-130 belongs to a shell company that dissolved 3 years ago. The vehicles can't be traced, and the 6 of us are just retired military having a reunion in Turkey." "Turkey is 3 countries away from Afghanistan." "Exactly," Sierra understood. "No paper trail, no official sanction, no backup if things went sideways. They would be ghosts, operating in the shadows. The same shadows that had swallowed Rachel Brennan and 11 others 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. 24 hours before mission launch, Sierra received another message. "Kellerman knows moving us tomorrow. You have 1 chance." Her blood turned to ice. "We're compromised," she told Blackwood. "Kellerman knows we're coming. He's moving the prisoners tomorrow." "Then we move tonight," Murdoch said. No hesitation. No debate, just immediate tactical adjustment. "We're not ready," Carson protested. "We don't have full reconnaissance, don't know the interior layout, don't know how many hostiles." "We never had full reconnaissance," Sierra said. Her voice was calm, the same calm she'd used 3 years ago when she'd made decisions that killed 27 people. "We never will, but if we wait, Rachel and the others die. If we wait, Kellerman wins." She looked around at the faces watching her, operators with decades of experience, people who had forgotten more about combat than she'd ever learned. "I'm 20 years old. I have no business leading this mission. I know that. You know that. But I'm the only one here who's carried these names for 3 years. I'm the only one who knows exactly what it costs to make the wrong call." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm going in tonight, with or without you. But I'd rather go in with you." Silence filled the room. Then Murdoch smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with death a long time ago and was just waiting for the right moment to meet it. "Well," she said, "I always wanted to see Afghanistan one more time." The others nodded, one by one, operators who had survived things most people couldn't imagine. choosing to follow a 20-year-old girl into a mission that would probably kill them all. "Wheels up in 4 hours," Blackwood said. "Get your gear, make your peace, and don't leave anything behind you're not willing to lose." Sierra returned to her apartment, looked at the 27 faces one more time, ran her fingers over Rachel's photograph. "I'm coming," she said again, "and this time I'm not leaving anyone behind." She packed light, weapon, ammunition, tactical gear, and one item that wasn't regulation, wasn't tactical, wasn't remotely useful for combat operations. A photograph, all 27 of them, printed on a single sheet, folded and tucked into her vest pocket where she could feel it against her heart. Because if she died tonight, she wanted to die carrying them. The way she'd been carrying them for 3 years. The way she'd carry them for the rest of her life if she survived. The C-130's engines roared as they lifted off into darkness. 6 operators, 1 pilot, 1 mission. No official authorization, no backup plan, no guarantee any of them would see morning. Sierra sat in a cargo bay, watching the others prepare their gear with practiced efficiency. Murdoch checking her rifle for the 4th time. Blackwood reviewing satellite imagery on his tablet. Carson, Dalton, and Rivers moving with the quiet confidence of people who had done this countless times before. She was the youngest person on this plane by 18 years, the least experienced, the most likely to get them all killed. But she was also the only one who knew exactly what was waiting for them in that compound, because she'd been the one who had left them there 3 years ago, the one who had followed orders and maintained silence and let 27 people die. Tonight was different. Tonight she was writing her own orders, making her own calls, taking responsibility for her own decisions. Tonight, Phoenix 7 was coming home, and she was bringing everyone with her, or she was dying in the attempt. There would be no third option, no acceptable losses, no tactical calculations that turned people into numbers. Just rescue, just redemption, just a 20-year-old girl keeping a promise she'd made 3 years too late. The plane banked hard, started its descent toward Afghanistan, toward Rachel, toward 12 Americans who had been waiting in darkness for 3 years. Sierra closed her eyes, felt the photograph against her heart, heard 27 voices calling her name across the distance. "I'm coming," she whispered one more time. And in Helmand Province, in a compound that officially didn't exist, Rachel Brennan looked up at the sound of distant engines. Too far away to be real, too familiar to be anything else. She smiled through broken teeth and 3 years of scars. Phoenix 7 was coming, just like she'd always known she would. The compound appeared in the darkness like a scar on the mountainside. Sierra watched through night vision optics as the C-130 banked away, leaving them alone in the Afghan wilderness, with nothing but the equipment they carried and a promise 3 years overdue. 2 vehicles waited at the cache point exactly where Blackwood's contact had said they would be. Toyota Hilux trucks, battered, dusty, the kind that blended into the landscape so completely they might as well have been invisible. The team loaded in silence. Murdoch took point vehicle with Dalton and Rivers. Sierra rode with Blackwood and Carson, the former Delta operator who had the kind of quiet competence that came from 20 years of doing things governments couldn't acknowledge. 20 kilometers to target, Blackwood said, checking his GPS. "Rough terrain, no roads for the last 5 clicks. We'll have to go on foot." Sierra nodded. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. This was different from 3 years ago. 3 years ago, she'd been safe in a command center, making decisions from behind screens and satellite feeds. Now she was on the ground, in the dark, about to walk into a compound full of hostile forces with nothing but 6 operators and desperation. 3 years ago, she'd been upstream. Tonight, she was in the river. The drive took 40 minutes. Every bump, every rock, every shadow that might be a Taliban patrol sent adrenaline spiking through her system. But the landscape remained empty, silent except for the wind and the growl of the engines. Carson drove with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Never too fast, never too slow. Reading the terrain like a book written in a language only he could understand. "You ever been in country before?" he asked Sierra. His voice was conversational, like they were driving to the grocery store instead of into a combat zone. "No, sir." "Drop the sir. We're civilians tonight, remember?" He smiled slightly. "First time's always the hardest. After this, everything else feels easy." "Assuming we survive," Sierra said. "There's that." Carson's smile widened. "But if we don't, at least we'll die doing something that matters. That's more than most people get." They ditched the vehicles 3 clicks out, covered them with camouflage netting, started the approach on foot. Sierra had studied the satellite imagery until she could see it with her eyes closed. The compound was built into the mountainside, 3 buildings arranged in a rough triangle around a central courtyard, guard towers at each corner, razor wire, motion sensors, the kind of security that suggested whoever ran this place wanted to make very sure nobody got in or out without permission. But security had patterns, routines, weaknesses, and Sierra had spent 48 hours identifying every single one. "East perimeter has a blind spot," she whispered into her comm. "Guard rotation every 30 minutes. We hit the gap at 02:15. That gives us a 4-minute window to breach." 4 minutes isn't much," Carson said. "It's what we have." They moved through the darkness like ghosts. Murdoch and her team circling north. Sierra, Blackwood, and Carson approaching from the south, converging on that blind spot in the east perimeter at exactly 02:15. The compound was quiet. Too quiet. Sierra felt ice in her stomach. Something was wrong. The lack of activity, the minimal lighting, the absence of the normal sounds you'd expect from a facility holding prisoners. They'd been expected. "It's a trap," she whispered. "We know," Blackwood replied. His voice was calm. "We've known since we received the last message, but Rachel and the others are still in there. So we're still going in." Sierra's throat tightened. These men, these operators who had survived decades of combat, they were walking into a trap because a 20-year-old girl had asked them to, because they believed in something more important than survival. They reached the perimeter fence at 02:14. Carson cut through the wire with practiced efficiency. No alarms, no response from the guard towers, nothing. Definitely a trap. They moved through the gap, across 20 meters of open ground, into the shadow of the eastern building. Still no response. Sierra's hand was slick with sweat inside her glove. Every instinct screamed at her to abort, to pull back, to call this off before it got them all killed. But Rachel was in there. Rachel and 11 others, waiting, believing, refusing to give up hope even after 3 years. Sierra thought about the photograph folded against her heart. 27 faces, 27 names, 27 people she'd left behind once. Not again. She moved to the door, tried the handle, locked. Carson moved up with breaching charges, set them with quick, efficient movements. "Step back. Breach in 3, he whispered. 2, 1. The explosion was muffled but devastating. The door blew inward. Sierra was moving before the smoke cleared. Through the doorway, weapon up, scanning for targets. The hallway was empty. Wrong. Everything about this was wrong. But she kept moving. Down the corridor, past closed doors, following the layout she'd memorized from satellite imagery. The detention cells would be in the basement, below ground, where satellite cameras couldn't see. Stairs appeared on her left, descending into darkness. She started down, Blackwood right behind her, Carson covering their 6. The basement was cold, damp, lit by dim fluorescent lights that flickered and buzzed. The air smelled like fear and suffering and 3 years of human misery. Sierra had smelled that smell before, in after-action reports, in testimonies from rescued prisoners, in her nightmares about places she'd never physically been, but had sent people into with her decisions. Now she was here, in the darkness, in the place where her decisions 3 years ago had left 12 Americans to rot. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, metal, reinforced, the kind designed to hold people who weren't getting out without help. Sierra moved to the first door, yanked it open. Empty. The second door, empty. Third, empty. Her heart was sinking. They'd been moved. Kellerman had moved them. She was too late. Again. 3 years of carrying guilt and planning and hoping, and she was too late. Then she heard it. A sound from the end of the corridor, metal scraping against concrete, and a voice. Weak, barely audible, but unmistakable. Phoenix? Sierra ran. Down the corridor, past the empty cells, to the last door on the right. She yanked it open, and there she was. Rachel Brennan, 28 years old but looking 50. Thin, scarred, her red hair matted and filthy, her green eyes sunken but still defiant, still alive, still breathing, still fighting. Phoenix 7, Rachel whispered. Her voice was wrecked, damaged by 3 years of screaming and suffering and refusing to break. I knew you'd come. I told them every day. I told them Phoenix 7 would come. Sierra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 3 years of guilt and nightmares in carrying Rachel's voice in her memory, and here she was, alive, real, not a ghost, not a casualty statistic, a person who had survived 3 years of hell, believing that Sierra would come back for her. I'm here, Sierra managed. Her voice broke. I'm finally here. She moved forward, started working on Rachel's restraints. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the locks. There are others, Rachel said. 11 more, different cells, different buildings. We'll get them all. Kellerman knows you're here. He set the trap. He's been waiting. I know. Phoenix. Rachel grabbed Sierra's arm. Her grip was weak, but desperate. He sold us. Sold all 27 of us. The whole operation was a setup. He made millions selling intelligence to Zarek. We were just proof that the deal was real. Sierra's vision blurred. I know. I figured it out. That's why I came. The restraints finally gave way. Rachel collapsed forward. Sierra caught her. The woman weighed almost nothing. 3 years of captivity had stripped away everything except will and fury, and the determination to survive long enough to see Phoenix 7 come back. Can you walk? I can run if it means getting out of here. Blackwood appeared in the doorway. We've got movement. Multiple hostiles converging on this position. We need to move now. There are 11 more, Sierra said. Then we get them all. They moved back into the corridor. Murdoch's voice crackled over the comm. North building secured. We have 5 prisoners. Repeat, 5 prisoners secured. But we've got at least 20 hostiles inbound, maybe more. South building, Sierra ordered. 6 more prisoners. We get them and we go. They emerged from the basement into chaos. Gunfire erupted from the guard towers, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Carson returned fire with methodical precision, dropping targets, buying time. Sierra and Blackwood ran for the south building with Rachel between them. The woman was moving on pure adrenaline and 3 years of rage. Her feet barely touched the ground. The south building was identical to the first. Same layout, same basement stairs, same corridor of metal doors. But these doors weren't empty. Sierra worked down the line, opening doors, finding prisoners, Americans. Some she recognized from casualty photos, some she'd never seen. All of them thin, scarred, broken in ways that would take years to heal if they ever healed at all. But alive. Sergeant Marcus Webb, 31, intelligence specialist who had been analyzing enemy communications. Corporal Sarah McKenzie, 26, combat medic who had saved 3 lives before being captured. Private Daniel Foster, 23, radio operator who had been coordinating with Sierra directly during the operation. Specialist Jennifer Cross, 29, logistics coordinator who had planned the original extraction routes. Corporal Michael Brennan, 32, Rachel's older brother. His eyes went wide when he saw her. Private Thomas Wright, 24, the youngest of the captured Rangers, still had the face of a kid despite 3 years of captivity. 6 prisoners, 6 Americans who had been listed as killed in action, 6 witnesses to Kellerman's betrayal. "Can you move?" Sierra asked each one. Got nods, got determination, got the kind of fierce refusal to quit that kept people alive through impossible circumstances. Michael Brennan grabbed his sister, held her like he'd never let go, both of them crying, both of them alive against all odds. "Let's go home," Rachel said. Her voice was stronger now, purpose replacing despair. They started back toward the extraction point. 12 prisoners, 6 operators, 20 hostile forces between them and freedom. The compound had become a battlefield. Tracer rounds cut through the darkness. Explosions bloomed where grenades found targets. The chatter of automatic weapons was constant. Murdoch's team was pinned down near the north building. Sierra could see muzzle flashes from 3 different positions, could hear Murdoch's voice over the comm, calling out targets and coordinates with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "We need to break through," Blackwood said. He was breathing hard, moving slower than he should. Sierra realized with horror that he was hit, blood soaking through his tactical vest on the left side. "Colonel, you're wounded." "I'm functional. Keep moving." They pushed forward. Carson, Dalton, and Rivers laying down suppressing fire. Sierra and Blackwood herding the prisoners toward the perimeter breach. 12 people who had been tortured for 3 years, moving through gunfire because it was that or die in the place that had held them. A hostile appeared from behind a storage building, weapon raised, finger on the trigger, aimed directly at Rachel. Sierra didn't think, didn't hesitate, raised her sidearm and fired twice, center mass. The hostile went down. Her first kill. Her first time pulling the trigger instead of making the decision from upstream. The weight of it hit her instantly, different from the weight she'd been carrying, more immediate, more visceral. A person, not a tactical asset, not a casualty projection, a person whose life she had just ended. But necessary. She kept moving. Rachel was beside her now. She'd picked up the fallen hostile's weapon, was covering Sierra's 6 with the muscle memory of 3 years ago, before the torture, before the captivity, when she'd been a ranger with a mission and people who depended on her. "Just like training," Rachel said. Her voice had an edge to it. 3 years of suffering finding release in violence and survival. "Better than training," Sierra replied. "This time we all go home." They reached the perimeter breach. Murdoch's team was already through. 5 prisoners secured, all moving toward the extraction point. But the hostile fire was intensifying. More shooters appearing from positions Sierra hadn't identified. More muzzle flashes. More incoming rounds that came too close. This was the trap. Kellerman had let them get the prisoners, let them think they were succeeding, so the slaughter would be complete, so no witnesses would survive. "We're not going to make it," Dalton said, former SEAL, 15 years of combat experience, and he could see the math, could see that they were outnumbered and outgunned and running out of time. "Yes, we are," Sierra said. Her voice was hard, final, "because I'm not leaving anyone behind. Not this time." She pulled out her radio, switched to a frequency she wasn't supposed to have access to, called a number she wasn't supposed to know. "This is Phoenix 7. I need immediate air support at these coordinates. Danger close. Hostiles in the open. Friendlies will mark position with IR strobes." Static for a moment, then a voice, young, surprised. "Phoenix 7? You're supposed to be KIA." "I got better. Do you have assets in theater or not?" Another pause, longer this time. We have a Reaper drone 3 minutes out, but ma'am, I'm not authorized to. Authorization code, Hotel Whiskey 779er. That's Admiral Price's personal authorization. Call him if you want confirmation, but those 3 minutes might mean 12 Americans die. Your choice. Silence. Sierra could almost hear the young officer on the other end weighing career against conscience, rules against right. IR strobes, the voice said finally. Mark your position. Danger close means danger close. You've got 3 minutes. Sierra almost collapsed with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. Admiral Price will have my ass if Phoenix 7 dies again. The line went dead. IR strobes, Sierra shouted. Everyone mark your position. Air support inbound. 3 minutes. The operators activated their strobes. Infrared markers invisible to the naked eye, but clear as daylight to military sensors. The prisoners huddled in the center, a tight defensive perimeter. 3 minutes became the longest 3 minutes of Sierra's life. Hostile fire continued, rounds impacting all around them. Rivers went down, leg wound, bleeding but alive. Carson dragged him to cover, kept firing. Rachel was beside Sierra, weak but determined, firing with controlled bursts, conserving ammunition, fighting like the Rangers she'd been 3 years ago. Just like old times, Rachel said. Her voice had a wild edge to it. 3 years of suffering, finding an outlet in violence, in survival. Better than old times, Sierra replied. This time we all go home. 2 minutes. The hostile fire was getting closer, more accurate. They were being flanked, surrounded. The perimeter was collapsing. Blackwood was down now, on one knee, still firing but fading, blood loss taking its toll. Sierra grabbed him, pulled him back. Stay with me, Colonel. Stay with me. Told you, he gasped. Told you I'd help you bring them home. Jacob would have wanted. Jacob is proud of you. I'm proud of you. Now stay alive so I can tell you that when we're not being shot at. 1 minute. The world had narrowed to muzzle flashes, in screaming, and the desperate hope that 3 minutes in military time actually meant 3 minutes. Then she heard it. A sound like tearing fabric. High above, growing louder, the Reaper's Hellfire missiles hit with surgical precision. 4 impacts, 4 massive explosions. The hostile positions disappeared in fire and shrapnel in the absolute violence of modern warfare. The gunfire stopped. The night went quiet except for ringing ears and labored breathing, and the sound of 12 people who had been prisoners realizing they were suddenly, impossibly, free. Move, Sierra ordered, before they regroup, before someone decides that wasn't authorized. Move now. They moved. 12 prisoners, 6 operators, 2 of them wounded, all of them alive. Through the perimeter, across the open ground, into the darkness where 2 Toyota Hilux trucks waited. Carson was working on Blackwood in the back of one Hilux. Pressure bandages, IV fluids, the kind of field medicine that kept people alive long enough to reach proper care. Colonel's stable, Carson reported. Lost a lot of blood, but the round missed the major arteries. He'll make it. Blackwood's eyes opened briefly, found Sierra's. Told you, he whispered. Told you we'd bring them home. Then he was out again, unconscious but breathing, alive. It took 15 minutes to reach the vehicles, 15 minutes of expecting gunfire that never came, expecting pursuit that didn't materialize, expecting the trap to spring again. But the compound was burning behind them, the hostile forces scattered or dead, and in the Afghan darkness, 18 Americans were running for the extraction point. The C-130 was waiting, engines already running. The pilot's face was grim when he saw them coming. 12 prisoners, 2 wounded operators, all of them covered in blood and dust, and 3 years of accumulated trauma. Jesus Christ, he breathed. What the hell happened? We got them all, Sierra said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical force. That's what happened. They loaded up. The prisoners in the center, the operators around them. Blackwood and Rivers getting emergency medical attention from Carson, who had cross-trained as a corpsman. Rachel sitting next to Sierra, neither of them speaking, neither of them needing to. The C-130 lifted off, banking hard, gaining altitude, putting distance between them and Afghanistan, between them and the compound, between them and 3 years of captivity and suffering. Sierra closed her eyes, felt the photograph still pressed against her heart. 27 faces, 27 names, but 12 of them were alive. 12 of them were going home. The mission wasn't over. Kellerman was still out there, still free, still protected by people who would rather bury the truth than face it. But tonight, Phoenix 7 had kept her promise. Tonight, she'd brought them home. The flight to Pakistan took 3 hours. They landed at a military airfield that officially didn't exist, transferred to a C-17 that officially wasn't there, started the long flight back to the United States with 12 prisoners who officially had died 3 years ago. Sierra spent the flight sitting with Rachel and the others, not sleeping, just existing in the same space, breathing the same air, being alive together when for 3 years they had all believed that would never happen. "Thank you," Rachel said finally. Her voice was barely audible over the engine noise. "I'm sorry," Sierra replied. "I'm so sorry it took me 3 years. You were 17 years old, following orders from a commanding officer. I never blamed you. None of us did." Rachel's hand found Sierra's, squeezed weakly. "We blamed Kellerman. We spent 3 years knowing he sold us, knowing he was free while we rotted in that compound, knowing he'd kill us if we ever got out." She turned to look at Sierra. Her green eyes were fierce despite the exhaustion. "But we also spent 3 years believing Phoenix 7 would come, that you'd figure it out, that you'd find us, that you'd bring us home." Her grip tightened. "We were right." Sierra couldn't speak. 3 years of guilt, 3 years of carrying 27 names, 3 years of believing she'd killed them all, and 12 of them had been alive the whole time, believing in her, waiting for her, refusing to give up because they knew Phoenix 7 would come. "Kellerman has to answer for this," Rachel said, "for what he did to us, for what he did to the 15 who really did die, for what he did to you." "He will," Sierra promised. "I'll make sure of it." "How? He's a rear admiral. He has connections, resources. He'll bury this, bury us, make it all disappear." Sierra smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent 3 years planning for exactly this moment. "He thinks he will, but he's miscalculated. Because I'm not going through military channels. I'm not going through the chain of command that he spent 30 years infiltrating." She pulled out her phone, made a call despite being 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. Satellite phone, encrypted, the kind that cost a fortune per minute but couldn't be intercepted. "Senator Harrison, this is Lieutenant Sierra Ashford. I need to speak with you about Operation Nightfall." Senator Charles Harrison, former Army Ranger, current chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, 70 years old, 40 years in service followed by 20 years fighting for accountability in government. A man who would listen. "Lieutenant Ashford, I've been expecting your call. Admiral Price informed me you'd been asking questions about a classified operation." "I have more than questions, Senator. I have 12 witnesses, 12 Americans who were held prisoner for 3 years because a flag officer sold them to the enemy. 12 people who can testify about treason, conspiracy, and murder." Silence on the other end. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was different. "Harder. You can prove this? I can prove all of it, but I need your help. I need public hearings. I need congressional oversight. I need sunlight on something that's been kept in the dark for 3 years. Public hearings are unusual for classified operations. This isn't a classified operation anymore, Senator. This is treason. and the American people deserve to know that one of their flag officers sold Rangers to the enemy for personal profit. Another pause, longer this time. When can you be in Washington? 18 hours. I'll have the committee assembled. Full public session, C-SPAN coverage. This is going to be ugly, Lieutenant. It should be. 27 Americans died. 12 more were tortured for 3 years. Ugly is the minimum we owe them. Agreed. I'll see you in Washington. The line went dead. Rachel was staring at Sierra with something that looked like awe. You just called a U.S. senator and demanded a public hearing. I called a U.S. senator and asked for justice. There's a difference. Phoenix 7. Rachel shook her head. You were terrifying at 17. At 20, you're unstoppable. Sierra looked around the cargo bay at 12 faces. 12 people who had survived the impossible, who had waited 3 years believing someone would come, who had refused to let Kellerman win. I'm not unstoppable, she said quietly. I'm just done being silent. The C-17 touched down at Andrews Air Force Base 18 hours later. A convoy of ambulances was waiting, medical personnel, debriefers, and standing at the edge of the tarmac, Admiral James Price. He watched as the 12 prisoners were helped off the plane, as the wounded operators were loaded into ambulances, as Rachel Brennan, barely able to walk but refusing a stretcher, made her way down the ramp with Sierra supporting her weight. When Sierra reached him, she stopped, saluted. Proper military courtesy despite the fact that she looked like she'd been through a war. She had been through a war. Price returned the salute, then did something unexpected. He extended his hand. Welcome home, Phoenix 7. All of you. Sierra took his hand. Permission to speak freely, Admiral? Granted. I went outside the chain of command. I conducted an unauthorized operation in a foreign country. I used your personal authorization code without permission. By every regulation in the book, I should be court-martialed. Price's expression didn't change. You rescued 12 American service members who had been illegally held for 3 years. You exposed treason at the flag officer level. You did what the system had failed to do for 36 months. He squeezed her hand. The Navy doesn't court-martial heroes, Lieutenant. We promote them. Sierra's throat tightened. Sir, Senator Harrison has requested your presence at a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing tomorrow at 0900. I'll be testifying as well, as will Colonel Blackwood once he's cleared by medical, as will all 12 survivors who are able. Price's voice dropped to something quieter, more personal. This is going to get messy. Kellerman has allies, people who will fight to protect him, to protect the system that allowed this to happen. Are you ready for that fight? Sierra thought about 27 faces, thought about 3 years of guilt, thought about Rachel and 11 others who had suffered because she'd followed orders instead of questioning them. I've been ready for 3 years, sir. Good, because we're going to need that Phoenix 7 steel to see this through. The 48 hours between landing at Andrews in the Senate hearing became something Sierra hadn't experienced in 3 years. They became hours where she wasn't alone with the weight. The Navy had set up a secure facility at Bethesda Naval Hospital for the 12 survivors. Medical treatment, psychological evaluation, security, everything they needed to transition from 3 years of captivity back to a world that had declared them dead and moved on. Sierra spent every moment she could there, not because she had to, not because anyone ordered her to, but because these 12 people were the only ones who truly understood what the last 3 years had cost. Rachel's room was on the 3rd floor, private, quiet, with a view of trees and sky instead of concrete walls and guard towers. Sierra found her there the morning after they'd landed, sitting by the window, staring out at freedom she still didn't quite believe was real. They want me to eat, Rachel said without turning around. 3 meals a day, calories, protein, like my body remembers how to process food instead of just survival rations and whatever the guards felt like giving us. Sierra sat in the chair beside the bed, waited. I can't, Rachel continued. Her hands were shaking. I try to eat and my stomach revolts. 3 years of not enough, and now there's too much, and I don't know how to exist in a world where food isn't a weapon. It took me 6 months before I could sleep more than 2 hours at a time, Sierra said quietly. After nightfall, after I came back and they told me I was dead and gave me a new name and a new life. 6 months of 2-hour cycles because that's how often I had to check the comms. How often extraction requests would come through that I couldn't answer. Rachel turned to look at her. Really look at her. How did you survive it? 3 years of believing you killed us. 3 years of that weight. How are you still standing? Sierra was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, a bird landed on a branch. Ordinary. Normal. The kind of thing people took for granted when they hadn't spent 3 years in a cell. I didn't survive it, she said finally. The girl who was Phoenix 7 died in that command center when I maintained radio silence. When I heard you calling and didn't answer. When I chose 200 theoretical lives over 27 real ones. She met Rachel's eyes. The person sitting here now is someone different. Someone who was built from guilt and fury and the absolute refusal to let your names be forgotten. Someone who spent 3 years learning everything about tactical operations and command structures and financial forensics, because the only thing that kept me breathing was the possibility that maybe, somehow, some of you had survived. Rachel's hand found Sierra's, squeezed with what little strength 3 years of captivity had left her. We heard you, you know, Rachel said. Her voice cracked. In the compound, they played recordings of the radio transmissions. Psychological torture. They play our voices calling for extraction. Play them over and over, asking us how it felt to know Phoenix 7 had abandoned us. Sierra's chest constricted. Rachel. But I knew something they didn't, Rachel interrupted. Her green eyes were fierce despite the exhaustion. I knew your voice. Knew the way you breathed when you were making hard decisions. Knew the exact moment on those recordings when you went from tactical coordinator to someone whose world was ending. She leaned forward. You didn't abandon us, Sierra. You were 17 years old following orders from a commander who sold us. And when you found out we might still be alive, you came for us. You walked into a trap. You risked everything. You kept a promise no one expected you to keep. 12 of you survived, Sierra whispered. 15 didn't. 15 died because Victor Kellerman sold them to Hamid Zarek. Not because of you. Not because of any decision you made. I could have broken radio silence. Could have called in extraction. Could have gotten 200 more people killed, Rachel finished. Could have made the same call Kellerman wanted you to make. Could have proven that Project Olympus worked exactly as designed, creating coordinators who would sacrifice others without question. She pulled Sierra's hand closer. You made the hard call, the impossible call, and then you spent 3 years refusing to accept it, refusing to let us be just numbers in a casualty report, refusing to let Kellerman win. Tears were streaming down Sierra's face. 3 years of holding it together. 3 years of being Phoenix 7, the ghost, the coordinator who never broke. And here in this hospital room with a woman who had survived 3 years of torture, it all finally cracked open. I hear your voices, Sierra said. Her voice was raw, broken. Every night, all 27 of you, calling for extraction, calling for help. And I'm there in that command center, and I can't answer. I can't break silence. I can't save you. Rachel was crying too now. Both of them. 2 women destroyed by the same operation. Rebuilt by the same determination. I hear them too, Rachel said. The 15 who didn't make it. Tyler Garrett telling his squad to hold on. Jacob Blackwood making jokes even when he knew it was over. Sarah McKenna singing hymns while she bled out because she said if she was dying with grace. Her grip tightened. But I also hear something else. I hear you 3 nights ago coming through that basement door. I hear you saying, I'm here, I'm finally here. I hear you keeping a promise that no one else in the entire military gave a damn about keeping." She pulled Sierra closer, forehead to forehead, two people who had survived the unsurvivable. "We don't get to forget them. Not the 15 who died, not the way they died, not what Kellerman did. But we also don't get to spend the rest of our lives drowning in guilt for being the ones who lived." "I don't know how to do that," Sierra whispered. "Neither do I," Rachel admitted. "But maybe we figure it out together. All 12 of us who came back, all of us who carry them. Maybe we figure out how to honor the dead without letting them pull us into the grave with them." The night before the hearing, Colonel Blackwood called Sierra from his hospital room 2 floors down. The doctors had cleared him for limited activity. The bullet wound had been serious, but not life-threatening. He'd recover, but recovery would take time. "Major Ashford," he said. "The promotion wouldn't be official for months, but he used the rank anyway." "Sir?" "My son, Jacob. The last letter he wrote to me, the one that arrived after he died. I never finished reading it." Silence on the line. "I couldn't," Blackwood continued. His voice was rough, raw. "Reading it meant accepting he was gone. Meant accepting that I'd sent him into a situation where he'd die, and I wouldn't even know why. So I read the first paragraph, and I put it away, and I told myself I'd finish it when I was ready. Colonel, I finished it tonight, after the doctors told me I'd live but I might never fully recover. After they told me the shrapnel did more damage than they initially thought. I figured it was time." He paused. Sierra could hear him breathing, controlling emotion that 3 years of grief had built up. "He wrote about you, about Phoenix 7, about how you'd stay on comms for hours after your shift ended because you wanted to make sure everyone made it back safe. About how you'd run scenarios in your head, calculating extraction routes and timing windows and backup plans because you never wanted to be in a situation where you had to choose who lived and who died." Blackwood's voice cracked. "He said you cared too much. That Project Olympus had tried to train the emotion out of you, tried to make you see people as tactical assets instead of human beings. But you couldn't. You cared about every single person on the ground. Cared so much it was killing you even before nightfall went wrong." Sierra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "He said," Blackwood stopped, gathered himself. "He said if something went wrong, if the operation went bad, he didn't blame Phoenix 7. He blamed the adults who put a child in that position, who created a system where a 17-year-old had to choose between impossible options and live with the consequences." "I'm sorry," Sierra whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save him." "I know. I've known since the briefing at Fort Bragg. But I needed you to know what he thought, what he understood. He died believing you did everything you could, believing that if anyone could have saved them, it would have been Phoenix 7. Sierra was crying now, quietly, the kind of crying that came from 3 years of holding everything in. "He also said one more thing," Blackwood continued. "He said if he didn't make it back, someone needed to make sure Phoenix 7 didn't destroy herself with guilt. Someone needed to remind her that she was 17 years old and none of this was her fault." He paused. "I failed him on that. For 3 years, I blamed you, hated you, demanded investigations and answers and justice without knowing that you were just a kid following orders from a man who had sold my son. But I'm not failing him anymore." His voice strengthened. "Tomorrow, when you testify, when Kellerman's lawyers try to break you, when they try to make you the villain, I'm going to be there, in whatever capacity the doctors allow. And I'm going to make sure every person in that room understands that Jacob Blackwood's father stands with Phoenix 7. "Thank you," Sierra managed. "Thank you for telling me." "Tomorrow," Blackwood said, "we finish this. For Jacob. For the 15 who didn't come home. For the 12 who did. For every person who ever trusted that their leaders wouldn't sell them." "Tomorrow," Sierra agreed. The Senate hearing room was packed, every seat filled, cameras everywhere, C-SPAN broadcasting live. The kind of national attention that could make or break careers. At the defendant's table, Rear Admiral Victor Kellerman sat with his legal team. 3 expensive lawyers in expensive suits. His face was calm, confident, the face of a man who had spent 34 years navigating military politics and had no reason to believe this would be any different. He had no idea what was coming. Senator Harrison called the hearing to order at 0900 exactly. His voice carried the weight of 40 years in service and 20 years in the Senate. This committee convenes to investigate allegations of misconduct related to Operation Nightfall, a classified hostage rescue operation conducted in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 3 years ago. He paused, let the words settle. The operation resulted in 41 American casualties, or so we believed. We have since learned that 12 of those casualties survived, were held prisoner, were tortured for 3 years while we held memorial services and told their families they died serving their country. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Kellerman's lawyers were whispering urgently, but Kellerman himself hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. His face was a careful mask. Our first witness is Lieutenant Junior Grade Sierra Ashford, call sign Phoenix 7, the tactical coordinator for Operation Nightfall. Sierra walked to the witness table. She was wearing her dress uniform, the one with the single combat action ribbon that Admiral Price had personally awarded her 2 hours ago, the one that marked her as someone who had seen combat, who had earned her place at this table. She sat down, placed her hands flat on the surface. The same posture she'd used in that briefing room at Fort Bragg when this had all started. But this time was different. This time she wasn't being mocked, wasn't being questioned about her qualifications. She was being given a platform, a voice, a chance to speak truth that had been buried for 3 years. Lieutenant Ashford, Harrison began, please state your age and rank at the time of Operation Nightfall. 17 years old, sir. Lieutenant Junior Grade, Tactical Coordinator with call sign Phoenix 7. The gallery erupted. 17 years old, a child, coordinating a classified military operation. Harrison let the noise die down naturally. Please explain to this committee how a 17-year-old came to be in that position. Sierra took a breath. This was it, the moment everything came into the light. I was recruited into Project Olympus at age 16, an experimental program designed to identify individuals with exceptional tactical processing capabilities. The program had been running since the 1980s, classified above top secret, designed to create tactical coordinators who could process information and make decisions faster than traditional command structures. She paused, made sure every word was clear. They found me through standardized testing. My spatial reasoning and decision-making scores were 4 standard deviations above the mean. They told me I was special, told me I could serve my country in ways most people couldn't, told me I was ready. Her voice hardened. They were wrong. I wasn't ready. Nobody is ready for that at 17. But Project Olympus didn't care about ready. They cared about results. What were your duties during Operation Nightfall? Harrison asked. I coordinated extraction routes for the hostage rescue team, monitored radio traffic, provided real-time tactical guidance based on satellite imagery and signals intelligence. When the team was ambushed, when 27 Rangers were pinned down and calling for help, I was the one who received those calls. The room was dead silent. And what were your orders from your commanding officer? Sierra turned to look at Kellerman, really looked at him, met his eyes across the room. Major Victor Kellerman ordered me to maintain radio silence, to ignore the extraction requests, to let 27 Rangers die so that a larger operation could proceed. Kellerman was on his feet, his lawyers trying to restrain him. That's a lie. I made a tactical decision based on $8.2 million, Sierra said. Her voice cut through his protest like a knife. That's how much you were paid by Hamid Zarek. That's how much 27 American lives were worth to you. The gallery exploded, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, Harrison's gavel banging for order. Lieutenant Ashford, those are serious allegations. Can you provide proof? Yes, Senator. She pulled out a folder, handed it to the committee aide. Financial records showing transfers from a mining company controlled by Zarek to offshore accounts owned by Rear Admiral Kellerman. Communication intercepts showing coordination between Kellerman and Zarek before the operation. And testimony from 12 survivors who spent 3 years being interrogated about what they knew. She gestured to the gallery where Rachel and the others sat. 12 faces. 12 people who had died and come back. They can tell you what their captors said, how they knew we were coming, how they knew our routes and our timing and our extraction plans, how they knew because someone had sold them that information. Kellerman was white now, his lawyers talking urgently, but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The operation wasn't about hostage rescue, Senator. It was about securing access to a lithium mine worth $200 million. Zarek got the intelligence he needed to ambush American Rangers. Kellerman got his payoff, and 27 people died so he could profit from their sacrifice. She stood up, walked toward Kellerman's table. Her voice dropped to something quieter, more personal. You asked me about my kill count in that briefing room. You wanted to humiliate me, to show everyone that I was weak, that I didn't belong. She was close enough now to see him sweating, to see the fear in his eyes. My kill count is 27, not enemy combatants, Americans, people who trusted me to save them, people who died because I followed your orders. Her voice broke, but she pushed through. But 12 of them survived, 12 witnesses to your treason, 12 people who spent 3 years in hell waiting for someone to expose what you did. She pulled the photograph from her vest pocket, unfolded it, placed it on the table in front of him. 27 faces, 27 names. These are the people you sold, Admiral. These are the Americans whose lives you traded for money. I want you to look at them. I want you to remember their names, because I've been carrying them for 3 years, and now you get to carry them too. She stepped back, returned to the witness table. The room was silent. Kellerman was staring at the photograph. His face had gone from white to gray. His hands were shaking. Senator Harrison, Admiral Price stood from his seat in the gallery. I have additional testimony, financial audits, communication logs, satellite imagery that contradicts every element of Admiral Kellerman's after-action report. The Navy has been conducting a parallel investigation since Lieutenant Ashford first brought these allegations to my attention. He walked to the front, placed a thick file on the committee table. Everything Lieutenant Ashford has said is corroborated by evidence. Victor Kellerman is guilty of treason, of conspiracy, of selling American lives for personal profit, and I'm recommending he be immediately stripped of rank and placed under military arrest. U.S. Marshals moved toward Kellerman's table before his lawyers could protest, before he could run, before he could do anything except sit there and watch his 34-year career collapse in real time. They cuffed him, read him his rights, led him away while cameras flashed and reporters shouted, and the American people watched a flag officer being arrested for treason on live television. Sierra sat at the witness table, watching, feeling the weight of 3 years starting to lift. Not completely, never completely, but enough to breathe, enough to believe that maybe, finally, justice was possible. Rachel appeared beside her, weak but standing, supported by 2 of the other survivors. You did it, Rachel said. You actually did it. We did it, Sierra corrected. All of us, together. Senator Harrison's gavel came down, not for order this time, for closure. This hearing stands in recess. The committee will reconvene tomorrow to hear testimony from the survivors of Operation Nightfall. to ensure their voices are heard, to ensure this never happens again. He looked directly at Sierra. Lieutenant Ashford, on behalf of the United States Senate, on behalf of the American people, thank you for your courage, for your sacrifice, for refusing to let this be buried. Sierra stood, saluted, felt tears streaming down her face but not caring anymore. For the 27, Senator, everything I did was for them. 6 months later, Sierra stood in her new office at the Pentagon. The walls were covered with photographs, 27 faces in one section, marked with the date they died and the words, "Never Forgotten." Staff Sergeant Rachel Brennan, Private First Class Tyler Garrett, Corporal James Mitchell, Lieutenant Jacob Blackwood, Sergeant David Palmer, Corporal Sarah McKenna, Private Daniel Foster, Specialist Jennifer Cross, Corporal Michael Thompson, Private Thomas Wright, Sergeant Marcus Webb, Specialist Amanda Rodriguez, Corporal Bradley Wilson, Private Jessica Martinez, Sergeant Christopher Lee. 15 names, 15 faces, 15 people who had died 3 years ago and would never come home. But there was a new section now. 12 faces, marked, rescued. Rachel, Michael Brennan, Daniel Foster, Jennifer Cross, Thomas Wright, Marcus Webb, Sarah McKenzie, and 5 others whose names had been carried for 3 years as dead weight, but who now lived and breathed and healed. All alive, all home, all healing in their own ways in their own time. And in the corner, a new marker, in progress. 14 names, 14 Marines who had gone missing in Syria in 2019. 14 people who might still be alive, might still be waiting for someone to come. The door opened. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood entered. He was in a wheelchair now. The injuries from Afghanistan had been worse than anyone initially realized. He'd never walk without assistance again. The doctors had been clear about that, but he was alive, and he'd insisted on being part of what came next. "Major Ashford," he said. Sierra had been promoted 3 months ago, youngest major in Navy history, given command of a new unit, Task Force Redemption, dedicated to finding prisoners of war and missing in action personnel who had been forgotten, abandoned, written off, never again. "We have confirmation on 2 of the Syria 14, Blackwood said. He rolled his wheelchair to the map on the wall, pointed to a location in northeastern Syria. Signals intelligence picked up American voices at this compound, 2 individuals, possibly more. Sierra studied the map, started calculating routes, timing, resources needed, the work that had become her life, the mission that gave purpose to the guilt she still carried. How long to put together an operation? 4 weeks if we go through proper channels, 4 days if we don't. Sierra smiled. We're done going through proper channels, 4 days. Rachel entered the office. She was working as an analyst now, too many injuries for field work. The 3 years of captivity had taken a permanent toll on her body, but her mind was sharp, her determination unshakable. I've got something else, she said. Her voice was still rough, permanently damaged, but strong. Cross-referencing Kellerman's financial records with other flag officers who served in the same regions. I found 3 other admirals with similar patterns, similar transfers, similar connections to foreign nationals. Sierra's expression hardened. How many? At least 3, possibly more. Kellerman wasn't an isolated incident. He was part of something bigger. The 3 of them looked at each other. Sierra, 21 years old, Blackwood, 63, Rachel, 29. 3 people who had been broken by the same system and had decided to fix it or die trying. Then we expand the mission, Sierra said. We don't just rescue prisoners. We root out every officer who sold their people, every flag officer who profited from American deaths. We tear down the system that allowed this to happen, and we rebuild it into something worthy of the people who serve. She looked at the 27 faces on her wall, at the 12 rescued, at the 14 in progress. Phoenix 7 died 3 years ago in Afghanistan, but Major Sierra Ashford is just getting started. Blackwood smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. Jacob would be proud if he could see you now. He can, Sierra interrupted. All 27 of them can, because I carry them. Every day, every mission, every decision. She turned to face them both. And I promise you this, every person we rescue, every corrupt officer we expose, every system we dismantle, it's all for them. For the ones who died, for the ones who survived, for every person who ever trusted that their leaders wouldn't sell them. Her voice was steel, promise, oath. Phoenix 7 came back from the dead, and she's bringing everyone with her. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Washington. Another day ending, another mission beginning, another chance to make things right. Victor Kellerman was in Leavenworth awaiting trial, facing charges that would put him away for life. 3 other admirals were under investigation. Project Olympus had been permanently disbanded. Congressional oversight had been established for all classified tactical programs, and 12 Americans were home. But 14 more were waiting, and however many others, in compounds, in prisons, and dark places around the world, waiting for rescue, waiting for justice, waiting for someone to remember they existed. Sierra Ashford, Phoenix 7, Major at 21, Commander of Task Force Redemption, stood in her office and made a silent promise to every face on her wall. I'm coming. I'll always come. And I'll never stop until every single one of you is home. Because that's what Phoenix 7 does. She rises from the ashes. She brings the lost home. And she never, ever leaves anyone behind. Not anymore. Not ever again. The mission continues. The work never ends. But for the first time in 3 years, Sierra Ashford smiled without pain, smiled with hope, smiled with the certainty that she was finally, truly doing what she was meant to do, saving lives, seeking justice, being the voice for those who had been silenced. That night, alone in her apartment, Sierra stood before the wall of photographs. 27 faces, 12 marked rescued, 15 marked never forgotten. She touched each of the 15. Tyler Garrett, Jacob Blackwood, Sarah McKenna, James Mitchell, David Palmer. Names she would carry forever. People who deserved better than the orders she'd followed. But 12 were home. 12 families had their loved ones back. 12 empty chairs at dinner tables were filled again. For the first time in 3 years, the weight felt different. Not lighter, never lighter, but bearable, shared, no longer crushing her alone. I kept my promise, she whispered to the 15. Not to all of you, but to 12. And I'll keep looking for the others, the ones we haven't found yet, the ones still waiting. She placed her hand over her heart, over the place where she'd carried their photograph into combat. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I'm asking for one thing. Let me finish what you started. Let me make sure no one else gets sold. No one else gets forgotten. No one else dies alone believing help isn't coming. The photograph stared back, silent, eternal. Judging or forgiving, she'd never know. But she'd keep trying, keep fighting, keep bringing them home, one by one, name by name, until the wall had more rescued than never forgotten, until Phoenix 7 could finally rest. Phoenix 7 was home, and she was just getting started.